Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to cover planetary transits, or Gochara, as they're known in Sanskrit, for October 2023. And this is a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective on all this. And it seemed like the theme for the month was a new game board with new players. So let's get into that. Note before, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. And then you might take a minute or two to read the rest of this discussion. If you're new to Vedic astrology or Jyotish or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are in my concepts playlist. And wherever you see a double asterisk, there's a teaching video on that subject. So again, if you're a beginner, some introductory videos that will be helpful to watch to get more out of this talk is our introduction to the constellations, or Rashis, North, South, and East Indian style charts, introduction to navigating a birth chart, the Lagna, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, first house, planetary aspects, natural, benefic, and malefic planets, or grahas, nakshatras, or lunar mansions. And then I've actually created videos on each planet and their symbolism. And these are the classic planets, all 9 of them, from Vedic astrology. So you can check out that playlist for each planet. All right, so grab your favorite beverage. We got a lot to go through today. There's a lot going on this month. All right, so today, October 1st, Mercury enters Virgo, or just did, its own sign, and that's Kanya in Sanskrit. It also went combust, or asta. Venus also just entered Leo, or Simha, and when it entered Leo, it also entered Magha Nakshatra. October 3rd, a couple days from now, Venus will have an exact aspect with Rahu, and Mars will enter Libra, or Tula. October 5th, Mars will cross Ketu. October 7th, Mercury enters Hasta Nakshatra. On 10th of October, Sun enters Chitra Nakshatra, and Venus will have an exact aspect with Saturn. On 11th of October, Rahu and Ketu are both go Sundi. 13th of October, Mars enters Swati Nakshatra. 14th of October, there's going to be a solar eclipse, or Surya Grahan, in Virgo. Also, Mercury enters Chitra Nakshatra. So we have two eclipses this month, and those are going to be the biggest events. So hold on to your hats. 15th of October, Saturn enters Dhanishta Nakshatra. 17th of October, Sun enters Libra, which is a Sankranti movement. When Sun changes sign, that's Sankranti. Venus also enters Purva Phalguni the same day. 18th of October, Sun crosses Ketu, Mercury enters Libra. 19th of October, Mercury crosses Ketu. So we're going to see this parade of planets across Ketu, which is going to make things quite unstable, actually, even more than the eclipses. It's not going to help the eclipse situations. 20th of October, Sun, there's going to be exact conjunction with Mercury. 22nd of October, Mercury enters Swati Nakshatra, and there's going to be an exact aspect between Venus and Jupiter. 24th of October, Sun enters Swati Nakshatra. 28th through 30th, well, the 28th of October, there's going to be a lunar eclipse, or Chandra Grahan, in Aries, or Mesha. At the same time, we're going to have a planetary war, or graha yuddha, between Mercury and Mars. And that same day of the 28th, Mercury will have an exact aspect with Jupiter, and Mars will have an exact aspect with Jupiter. And that planetary war continues through the 30th of October. And then on the 30th of October, Venus enters Uttara Phalguni Nakshatra, Rahu enters Pisces, or Pisces Rashi, or constellation, and Revati Nakshatra, and Ketu enters Virgo. So that's most days of the month we have something going on. So let's get into details on what all this means. All right. So first off, I wanted to show you the sky pattern at the beginning of the month, so October 1st, and the end of the month, October 31st. And I've shifted these horoscope said that they're both with Aries Lugna in the first house. So that means that these are essentially the natural zodiac. Natural zodiac means when you have the first constellation in the first house. And that's kind of like a birth chart for the whole planet, really. So it should be encompassing kind of global or collective energy. So just to give like a little bit of a heads up of the energies that we're facing in the beginning, how the planets and the energy shifting from beginning of the month to the end of the month. So October 21st, I think the time on this exactly was 1909 Eastern Standard Time. So again, Aries or Mesha Lugna, natural zodiac. The moon, the nakshatra is in Bharani. And the thing is, Bharani is a fairly dramatic nakshatra because it's symbolized by a womb. And so you get energies of like life and death here. So cycle of life, that sort of thing. But a lot of, drama and trauma and turning over things and birth and death. And, it's not a peaceful, wouldn't say it's a peaceful process, as I'm sure anybody who's given birth would agree. Good comes out of it, but the process itself is not very peaceful. So the thing is that we've got all these planets in Aries. So we have Moon, we have Rahu, we have Jupiter, we have Saturn aspecting onto all this. So you can see the big dark gray circle up top, and Saturn with its navy arrow sharing its energy in here. So the thing is, Saturn during this beginning of the month is in Shatabisha nakshatra, which is a nakshatra that means translates to 100 healers. So Saturn is super strong in its own sign in Aquarius. It's retrograde, so there's double primary strength. And it's aspecting into Aries where it's debilitated. So it's super strong, but it's causing a lot of havoc on the moon, which represents the mind, Jupiter, which represents intuition, but also enthusiasm, but also optimism. And then there's Rahu. So we've got the north node of the moon, which is symbolic of things that are hidden, unexpected. So there's a big roller coaster going on in Aries right now. We also have Mars aspecting into all this from the sixth house in this chart. And so that brings some strength here, but it also brings more fire. And the thing is, right now, Mars is combust. So um, there might be more strength internally, but externally, it's still going to be a wild ride. Yeah, so that's what we're starting off with. What else is important here? Oh, so the other thing is, I circled Mercury, Sun, Mars in the sixth house. So there's a lot of fire. You have two fire planets, Sun and Mars, and we have Mercury in its own sign. And Mercury in Virgo, this particular constellation, is all about trying to create order. So you have this tension between trying to create order in daily life, daily routines is the sixth house, and what this person or the collective is facing right now. So there's a lot of weeble wobble in the external world trying to create create some sort of order out of this. So that's a tough challenge. And then you see this big, thick gray arrow right above Rahu, leaning right into the 12th house. That's where Rahu is going to be shifting, and Ketu is always 180 degrees from Rahu. So Ketu is going to shift. And after they form the eclipses, because Rahu and Ketu are basically what cause the eclipses, they're going to shift signs on the 30th of the month. So it's almost like this like rumbling and grumbling and all this that's going on or that we're feeling right now. If you're sensitive to these energies, I'm sure you're feeling them already. Um, I do have a whole video on eclipses, so if you want to know more about them, generally, not these particular eclipses, but generally, I would check out that video. But the thing is with Rahu and Ketu is they always bring things that are, and I also have a video on Rahu and Ketu as planets, not just as just not just as part of their participation in eclipses, but Rahu and Ketu symbolize things that are unusual, bizarre, hidden, that sort of thing. It's almost like the circus comes to town. That's kind of, and the only thing to know about eclipses is to expect the unexpected. And it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes I find as the eclipses are approaching, I find I can almost every day write down something that happened that was just unexpected. And sometimes I realize that I actually in my head had a bad expectation and there was actually something positive that happened. And sometimes I realize I had a positive expectation and life didn't meet that expectation. And so sometimes it's sort of this exercise in me um, recognizing what my expectations are. You don't even realize you have them half the time, it seems like. So Rahu and Ketu bring those sorts of things to life. But this is where we're starting out at the beginning of the month. Then if we look to the right, this is the sky pattern October 31st, and this is 17:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Not that that time matters too much, but again, Aries or Mesha Lugna, just to line up with the natural zodiac for the collective. And this time, the moon's nakshatra is in Rohini. Rohini is a completely different nakshatra than Bharani. Rohini is the most attractive, seductive, pleasant planet. And moon, not only is moon in this nakshatra, but moon is in Taurus where it's exalted. So the mind is going to be in a much different place than all of this Rahu, like trying to maintain order, trying to maintain optimism, but having this massive Saturn on the moon with Rahu. It's like you won't know, even though you're trying, or somebody's trying to keep up with all this. It's going to be really difficult on the mind. But we see a light, towards the end of the month after the smoke is cleared and the dust is kind of settled. Because Saturn, this massive Saturn, is still on Jupiter, but for a few weeks, not very long, but for a few weeks, Saturn will switch into Dhanishta Nakshatra. So instead of being in Shatabisha, where it can indicate things like chronic disease, things that are difficult to cure, diseases that are difficult to diagnose, just, not generally good prognosis, then it steps back into Dhanishta. Dhanishta is symbolized by a drum. So, and Saturn is a planet that symbolizes structure. So then it's like about getting things back into structure, getting back into order. And that's aspecting onto Jupiter, but Rahu's off of that, of Jupiter. So there's still some issues, but um, not as bad as what we're starting off with at the beginning of the month. Also in the second chart, we have a Saraswati yoga. Saraswati yoga is a combination of planets. In this case, it's Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus that are in houses and certain configuration indicates things like art and learning, education and our art. And Rohini is a nakshatra that symbolizes again things that are alluring and beautiful and attractive, but also the arts as well. And so it's just so much less chaos going on in this chart in the last part of the month. And it also is, part of this release of chaos, this whole thing that's whatever is getting burst or ejected, it almost seemed like a cleanse or something that was going on. At the last rumblings, the last delivery of karma that Rahu and Ketu have to deliver before they switch signs. Then once they switch, it's like, okay, now let's acclimate to the new paradigm that we're going to be living in for the next year and a half because Rahu and Ketu only switch signs every year and a half. But it just seems like the chaos has died down a bit, and so there's enough leveling of the chaos that you actually can participate in things like art and attraction and love and all the sort of finer things of life instead of being in survival mode like it looks like the energy is predominantly at the beginning of the month. So that's the big shift that's going on. Let's go through planet by planet and see what. All right, so let's talk about Mercury first. Mercury is a fast-moving planet, so it seems like every couple days or so, Mercury's doing something new. And if you're a Mercury-based sign, meaning you have a Lugna in Gemini or Virgo, or you have strong Mercury or a Mercury-dominated chart, then you will be feeling more of this. Or if you're running Mercury Dasha planetary period, Mercury symbolizes things like the rational mind, decision making, details, speech, education, organizing, analysis, also medically hands and arms. So if you want to know more, this is just a few things that Mercury symbolizes. If you want to know more, I have a whole video on Mercury you can check out. All right, so today Mercury entered Virgo or Kanya, and it went combust or asta. That's good news, in some respects, because Mercury has been lingering in Leo for longer than a month, with this huge, strong Saturn on it, really dimming Mercury's light and making it difficult to make decisions and things like that. Um, when Mercury goes into its own sign, it's called Swa. It means it's strong. And Virgo is a dual earth sign. So it's going to be a very practical, organizing type energy here. Um, since Mercury is a planet, represents that, but then Virgo is a earth sign. And also because it goes combust, that mercurial energy is going to be more internal. So there's going to be a lot of internal decision making and thoughts and analysis and that sort of thing, more than external things that Mercury represents, like even travel, communication, that sort of thing. Then on the 7th of October, Mercury enters Hasta Nakshatra. And Mercury again represents hands, and the symbol of Hasta Nakshatra is a hand. So this might be literally putting your hands on something, like maybe some sort of craft, or I don't know, fixing your plumbing or something like that. And because it's a hands-on thing, Mercury also represents business. It could be something like a practical, involved micromanager type of person or business, or a business that needs some sort of activities related to that. October 14th, Mercury enters Chitra Nakshatra. Chitra Nakshatra is symbolized by a gemstone. So there's a lot of structure related to this nakshatra. So then the thinking, rather than being hands-on, the mind is going to go into more of a kind of organizing, planning, architecture type mode. What do you want to create, rather than getting in there and kind of managing things hands-on. It's almost like a step back to think, well, what do I really want to create moving forward? Then on the 18th of October, Mercury will enter Libra or Tula. Since Libra is ruled by Venus, that's the friend sign for Mercury, so Mercury will do okay there, pretty well there. Libra, though, is a movable air sign, and Mercury is a planet that represents the mind. So there's going to be a lot of thinking going on the 18th once Mercury switches signs. And the thing is that Venus, at that time, the day before, Venus is in sun sign Leo, but on the 17th of October, Sun moves into Libra. So there's going to be a parivartana, or exchange of houses between Venus and the Sun, which you can almost swap the two in your mind or on a chart. And so that means that Libra is going to be Venus dominated. Anything that goes on in Libra after the 18th is going to be, or after the 17th is going to be Venus dominated, which is actually not bad, because Venus tends to be, in most regards, a benefic planet. The only thing, though, is that if Venus is a Chidra graha for you, Chidra graha means a graha or planet that is piercing, or a kind of a indication of weakness or vulnerability. Or it might be that Venus, for example, is your Aviyogi. The Aviyogi planet is a planet that indicates dearth or uh, poverty, or can for some people. So usually, Venus. It's usually better to have a Venus dominated chart than like a Saturn dominated chart, but each their own. Then on 19th of October, Mercury crosses K2. So this is part of this parade of planets crossing K2 in this month. So the thing about this parade is that K2 is the part of this parade. K2 is an explosive planet. It's unpredictable. It's kind of like Mars. Mars is a fiery violence, erratic planet. And so you put even more of a twist on that and you get K2. Plus hiddenness. Mars is kind of in your face. K2 is like you never know what's coming. It's like getting sucker punched. It can be. Um, and so the rational mind is going to cross this flux point, or flash point here. So, and Mercury also represents things like friends, colleagues, clients, speech, even like electrical, computer things. And so there might be like a sudden loss or altercation with these things: friends, colleagues, clients, speech, electrical, computer issues. So the thing is, because this is a Venus dominated Libra sign at the time, that means that Venus being in its own sign is going to help protect the non-living things. So if it's like a electrical thing or a computer thing, there'll be some protection, but there might be a sudden fallout with like a friend or colleague or client that you never saw coming. Yeah, so that's a possibility. 20th of October, Mercury will have an exact conjunction with Sun, so they'll be exactly in the same position in the sky. And that's when, after this, once Mercury passes the Sun, that means that it's going to get farther and farther away from combustion. Combustion is when a true planet, is close enough to the Sun that it gets eclipsed. And so you can't physically see the planet if you looked up in the sky. And it means that the energy of that planet is more internal than external, or manifests internally more than externally. So once Mercury passes the Sun, it's going to slowly start moving from this internal dominated kind of energy to starting to become more externally focused. On the 22nd of October, Mercury enters Swati Nakshatra. Swati Nakshatra, the symbol of that is new grown grass blowing in the wind. So it's a very restless energy, I find. Like literally, when I find people who have placements in Swati Nakshatra, they're just a ball of nerves, typically, I find, very anxiety prone. And Mercury's a planet that not only symbolizes, again, mental things like decision making, analysis, that sort of thing, but it's also a planet that symbolizes the peripheral nervous system. So we've got this peripheral nervous system symbolizing planet in this Swati Nakshatra. So there can be some nervousness, restlessness, difficulty with decisions, tentative communications, because again, it's new grown grass. It's not very stable or established. Um, and then 28th through 30th October, Mercury and Mars are going to be in planetary war. And this is going to be in the middle of an eclipse. So this is going to bring more instability to the eclipses. And the second eclipse is happening partly here, or directly opposite to it in Aries. So the instability of Mercury and Mars, those energies will be part of the, I believe it's lunar eclipse that's happening in Aries at the end of the month. So when Mercury and just by themselves, this planetary war between Mercury and Mars is like mind versus actions, rational mind versus impulsiveness, friend versus sibling. So these are the things, that might come up during this planetary war period. And then on the 28th of October, there's going to be an exact aspect of Jupiter in the middle of this eclipse, in the middle of this planetary war. And I'm glad to see this because Jupiter is the great benefic. And generally, when Jupiter, crosses something or aspects something, it gives it a little bit of a boost, a little bit of like grace. If you've been struggling with something, there's a little bit of grace that tends to come in, where it's just sort of, it's like, oh, okay, maybe there's some hope, it might give you some renewed hope, that sort of thing. So, or even like a spiritual perspective, because Jupiter represents spirituality. So the mind is going to be shifting, flexing, flowing throughout the month in different directions. So again, that's part of the roller coaster that's happening this month. So then we have Venus or Shukra and Mars or Mangal transits in October. I think most of these are Venus transits. But let's see. So October 1st, Venus enters Leo or Simha, Maga, also Maga Nakshatra. So that was today. It just did that. Mars enters Libra or Tula. I think that's also happening now or just happened. So that's, we have three planets shifting today, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So um, that's half of the people on this planet have a rising sign in either uh, Mercury owned house or a Venus owned house or a Mars owned house. So there's going to be a lot of shifting today for people, instability generally. So Venus and Leo, that's an enemy sign for Venus, so it's not going to do super great. It's also a fixed fire sign. So very steady, very fiery. Also, Leo can represent like a platform or stage, and Venus represents things like love and art, also vehicles. And so, and the Maga Nakshatra is a throne. So there can be this sort of like leadership action or public display of love or art, that sort of thing. And with Mars entering Libra, Libra is a movable air sign. So it's going to be a lot of consideration because air signs are all about ideas. So there's going to be a lot of new consideration of how to initiate new activities, but it's going to be more thinking about it rather than doing it. Yeah. So uh, new actions and love and other activities. So October 3rd, there's going to be exact aspect of Rahu with Venus. So again, Rahu represents things that are sudden, unexpected. Um, so there might be some sort of sudden, bizarre incident regarding art, love, relationships. Rahu can represent things that are foreign as well as things that are like computers and technology. So maybe something online. October 5th, Mars will cross K2. This is, watch out here, because this is pretty strong explosive energy here. Mars on its own represents explosions and K2 does as well. There's similar energies, but K2 is even more kind of twisted and unexpected. So this can like be like the match that sets off the fire keg or the uh, gunpowder keg, that sort of thing. So there can be, but the thing is, Mars is going to be combust, so you won't be seeing Mars and you can't see K2. So this will be more of like an implosion rather than an explosion, I would imagine. Mars can represent siblings. Both of these planets represent accidents, infectious disease, and inflammation. So, probably October 5th is going to be intense, one way or another for people. October 10th, Venus, there's an exact aspect with Saturn. Saturn is going to be again in Shatabisha Nakshatra, representing difficulties and difficult healing. And Saturn as a planet represents delays, lowness, destruction. So we're talking difficulties, delays in art and love. Yeah, the first half of the month is going to be pretty rough, I think, on Venus here. A roller coaster for sure. 13th of October, Mars enters Swati Nakshatra. That's the nakshatra I mentioned with Mercury, because Mercury and Mars are close to each other there. So again, Swati is symbolized by new grown grass blowing in the wind. So unsure, tentative new actions being considered. Also potentially learning new things or new learning activities. So something internal, because Swati can also represent one of the deities associated with Swati is Saraswati, and Saraswati is the goddess of learning and art. So there could be new activities, but they're going to be internal activities like learning rather than something external like, I don't know, hammering a board or something with a nail. Then October 17th, Venus enters Purva Falguni Nakshatra. Purva Falguni, well, that's going to be a big shift, I think, after Venus crosses or is linked with Rahu and Saturn. Then October 17th, Porta Falguni is like enjoying the finer things in life, and Venus is a planet that also represents the finer things in life. So it looks like there's going to be a few good days here for Venus. The last week and a half of the month is probably going to be more fun than the first half. And there's also this parivartana with the sun. So Venus is going to be Swa in its own sign in Libra. And so that means that's going to bring sort of push Venus forward into Libra instead of being in Leo. It's going to be kind of in both because there's exchange of houses with the sun, but that means that Venus and Mars are in the same house. That's usually an indication that there's some sort of like love connection or something like that, a romance type thing going on. So that could be, on the books here for some people. The thing, though, is again, all this other stuff going on with Rahu Ketu, the eclipses, the planetary war. Um, I'm just not sure this is something as exciting or enticing as this may be if it pops up. I'm not sure how long lasting it'll be. So if you're just looking for fun, then hey, by all means. But if you're looking for more, watch yourself. Um, October 22nd, Venus is going to have an exact aspect with Jupiter. So again, you're going to have this kind of spiritual benefic boost in love and art. So yay. Then 28th through 30th of October, this is when, again, the Mars-Mercury planetary war happens, and then Mars is going to have an exact aspect with Jupiter. So we've talked about the planetary war. So I just listed it here, so you got it all together, all the Mars transits together. And then the 30th of October, Venus enters Uttara Falguni Nakshatra. So whereas Purva Falguni is really just about enjoyment, having fun, Uttara Falguni has the added energy of enjoyment, but with purpose. So it's sort of like maybe whatever this thing was that was just for fun, it kind of popped up in the middle of the month. Maybe there is more to it. But again, this is on the tail of the eclipse here, the eclipses here, and also the same day Rahu and Ketu shift signs. So especially if somebody's running Rahu or Ketu, their energy is going to shift, and so Um, what I've seen sometimes is that things might be going well with a relationship, and when one person in the relationship they shift, they switch their planetary period, or they have planets that shift signs. That's when, like, all of a sudden, like, it's sort of like what happened to relationship, and that's because one person, um, their planets shifted in a way that took them in another direction or a different focus. And so, you know, ghosting isn't always personal. It can be planetary, but that's a possibility here. So, again, if you're looking for more than fun, just be careful. So here's a chart. I always like to pull out charts that symbolize or kind of mimic the sky pattern so we can get some more physical embodiment of these energies rather than just have it all be abstract. So this chart I found that seemed pretty good for this month. This is the chart of Alfred Nobel, or Nobel, I guess I should say. So he was born October 21st, 1833 in Stockholm, Sweden. Some birth time I found for him was 6:40 in the morning, but that has not been confirmed. So I looked at this chart. It seems to work pretty well, but I didn't dig too deep. But it does seem to work, so we'll use it today. The birth of Shah, so planetary planets that he was running when he was born is Moon, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury. So when I see these planets, three of them represent, well, two of them represent the mind, so Moon and Mercury. So the intuitive mind, imaginative mind, and then the analytical mind. There's Jupiter, that represents education. There's Mercury that represents education. And then there's Saturn, which is a little bit different than represents death. So it's kind of like imagination, mind, death, you know. So it's just, again, not that you can read so much into this, but I find that when I look at the birth to Shah, it's almost like a silhouette of the person's energy and what they end up being. It's almost like a signal for what they end up being known for, or what are the important planets throughout their life, because they're infused in that time that they're born. Then the dasha sequence. So he was born in the moon, the Mahadasha, the biggest dasha, the main planetary period. And then after moon comes Mars, after Mars comes Rahu, after Rahu comes Jupiter, after Jupiter comes Saturn, and then he passed away. So if we look at his chart with knowing nothing else, where's the moon? The moon is here in the fourth house, and then it's aspecting into its own sun in the 10th house. And the moon represents imagination, and with the mind, or with the moon aspecting into Cancer in the 10th house representing career, imagination is going to be an important part of this person's career, which it will be, because he was the inventor of dynamite, besides also creating the Nobel Prize series, like the Nobel Peace Prize and that sort of thing. He was able to allocate all that money in his will for these Nobel Prizes because he made so much money from creating dynamite. So, which is kind of ironic, because with dynamite, obviously he escalated a lot of violent activities and death of man, death of humanity through his invention. So anyway, but you can see here Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn. So if we just look at these as symbols, like Moon, imagination, Mars, violence, innovation. Yes, that's him. Rahu, ambition. Yes. Rahu is also hidden, unexpected. Yes, that's him. Jupiter, publishing, also expansion. So yeah, his inventions took off for sure. And then Saturn is death, and isolation, and his Saturn happens to be in the 12th house of isolation. So I do I read that he was actually quite isolated in his life, and he liked to be isolated. He likes to go tinker in the lab, work with his nitroglycerin or whatever he did. So let's go through this a little more systematically from the top. The Lugna, first house. So the Lugna is Libra Tula in Chitra Nakshatra. It's a movable air sign, so a very dynamically thoughtful person, or idea person, which he was. Sun is also here, but it's debilitated. It's also in Chitra. So Chitra again, symbolized by a gemstone, a lot of structure. Mars is combust. So we're talking about Mars combust. So you can't see his Mars. And it's in Swati. Again, the nakshatra is symbolized by new grown grass in the wind, blowing in the wind. Mercury is also combust. It's also has digbal or directional strength. And it's also in Swati. And the thing is, Mars and Mercury here are just a few days away from a planetary war. And the thing is, I find that it's not just the exact time that they're in planetary war. So planetary war happens when two true planets are within 1 degree of each other. But I find that if there's if the planetary war happens within a week of somebody's being born, that person tends to have a lot of warring nature within themselves and with other people. And that's what he was all about. I mean, he he created weapons of war. Yeah. And, again, Mercury being the rational mind and Mars being action, they're I don't know if he actually thoroughly went through all this. I think he was just really excited about all these explosives, like he was just into it. And I'm not sure how much consideration he had for what it would mean for humanity and violence, the level of violence, escalation of violence on the planet through his invention. I mean, I'm sure there are other things too, like, I don't know, maybe quarries or digging out precious metals, but although I'm sure people would also say, well, that's, violence against the earth. And, yes, it's true. I'm sure there are some positive things that happen with explosives like dynamite, but a lot of destruction. And so there's the whole ethical thing of, he could have just tinkered in his lab. He didn't need to bring it onto the world stage, world market. He could have just, I don't know, blown up things in his backyard, but no, he brought it forward. So And there's also here a parivartana between Venus and Mercury. Sort of this month we have a parivartana between Venus and Sun. We have a parivartana or exchange of houses between Venus and Mercury. So there's a tension for him because of this, of being a public person, also being liking to be isolated, because Venus here is in Uttara Falguni. So there's an enjoyment of actually being on his own, inventing things in a lab. There's also an aspect of Jupiter, which is an Ashwini on this lugna, so wanting to be first. There's also an aspect of Rahu and Ardra. Ardra is symbolized by a electrical storm, like a thunderstorm, and so that charged bolt, lightning bolt could be a symbol, if we abbreviate it in Rahu. So an unexpected lightning bolt, and that's dynamite. So here you go. And so all of this was his personality. Um, because Venus, when you flip Venus into the Lugna, that's going to strengthen the personality as well as the body generally. But this is going to be somebody who likes to isolate, the tension between public role and wanting to be by themselves, an architect, developer of new, unusual ideas, explosive, enthusiastic, highly educated, erudite, imaginative. The other thing is that K2 and Rahu are all over this guy's chart. You don't always, or the way I was taught, you don't always take special aspects of Rahu and Ketu, but both of them actually have special aspects in this chart. And so Ketu's on 3 houses and Rahu's on 3 other houses. So half of the houses in the chart are Rahu and Ketu. Sun, unexpected, ambition, separation. Yes, that's all that his life was about. And also his personality, as far as I know. I didn't get too deep into his bio, but it looks like there's plenty of that. He was just an unusual guy and character, and like never got married and had unusual relationships, and which, if he's a Rahu Ketu guy, he's going to be an oddball. So second house, Saturn is aspecting there. Saturn's in Hasta, nakshatra symbolized by hand. He spoke a bunch of foreign languages, and Saturn represents foreign things. And the second house represents speech, so that lines up. Third house, we have Ketu here in Purvashada. And this K2 aspects the 11th house. K2, again, can represent violence and separation. And he had apparently a bunch of siblings. I think there are 8 siblings, and only 3 of them or 4 of them survived into adulthood. So with K2 on the third house of siblings, usually younger siblings, and then the 11th house of older siblings, there was a lot of loss of siblings. So that works. The fourth house, there's the moon in Shravana. The moon in the fourth house creates a karako bhava. The moon represents, as a planet, represents mother, and the fourth house represents mother. And when you get moon in the fourth house, you can have issues with mom. But it looks like she was a fairly strong character here because Mars is aspecting into this fourth house, and Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So strong mom, but issues there. The fifth house, we have Rahu aspecting here from this Ardra Thunderbolt Nakshatra. So he was obsessed with these explosives, I think, from a young age. And his father apparently got him into it because his father was a chemist. Chemist. What else was he? And he worked on torpedoes. So it ran in the family. Sixth house, we have Venus aspecting here from Gochara Falguni. So he didn't have obvious enemies, I think, because he was such a powerful guy, but he definitely had hidden enemies because you have Saturn and Venus in the 12th house of hidden enemies, and Venus is debilitated there. Um, Seventh house, we have this retrograde Jupiter, strong in Ashwini, aspected by Mars, Mercury, Sun, Venus, all these planets in the first house. First, he wants to be first in business and a bunch of fire relationships, business and personal. Yeah, but successful because you're going to have Mars aspecting here. That's going to make Mars swa in this house. The Sun aspects here. It's going to be exalted in this house of Aries. So super strong individual business for this guy. The eighth house we have aspected by Mars, so the deep psychology of a chemist, which he essentially was with his invention of dynamite. Um, the ninth house, there's Rahu, again in Ardra, so unusual explosions. And I mentioned his father worked on torpedoes. The 10th house, we have that moon aspecting its own sign, so highly imaginative and also public works for his career, part of his career. The 11th house, I already mentioned the loss of siblings because of the K2 aspecting there. And then 12th house, Saturn, Venus, Mercury. So he enjoyed being by himself and tinkering in the lab, and he had a purpose. It gave him a purpose. But there's also definitely a loss of loved ones because Venus is there. Also, mother, because the fourth house is Lord is Saturn. Saturn's there. And then literally hands, I could imagine, because Saturn um, is in Hasta nakshatra, which is symbolized by hand, and Saturn represents structure, loss, destruction. So I'm sure, especially in the beginning, when people didn't know what they were doing with the dynamite, I bet there were a lot of injuries with just handling it, let alone throwing it into groups of people or whatever people are doing with dynamite, or exploding bridges and trains and stuff. I mean, all kinds of stuff happened. So, loss of a lot of loved ones here. So, again, this is a chart that's very Rahu K2 influenced. We have a planetary war. We're just off a planetary war between Mars and Mercury. There's a parivartana between Venus and Mercury instead of Venus and Sun. Um, yeah, so a lot of similarities for things going on now this month. Okay, so let's talk about Sun and Saturn. So Sun or Surya and Saturn Shani transits in October. 10th of October, Sun enters Chitra nakshatra. So that's again is that gemstone symbolized by this nakshatra. So structure, architecture. Venus is also has an exact aspect by Saturn that day. So again, that's a tough day for Venus, probably. So things symbolized by Venus like love, relationships, maybe vehicle, maybe arts. But with Sun entering Chitra, that's going to be like a structure, new structure potentially, or restructuring of work, goals, purpose. Like maybe getting a to-do list together or something like that. Venus, there's going to be a restructuring of relations with Venus and Saturn here. And to what extent, everybody's going to be different depending on their natal chart, what planets they're running, that sort of thing. 15th of October, Saturn enters Dhanishta nakshatra. So it's moving out of Shatabisha, the 100 healers nakshatra, and it's moving into this Dhanishta. So Dhanishta is about rhythm. It's symbolized by a drum. And sometimes music can come out of this when different planets are here. So, and since Saturn is retrograde, this is about reestablishing rhythm and grounding and stuff like that. It's getting a little. Everybody's getting a little bit of a breather from the Saturn and Shatabisha that it's been in for months, and it's been like really taking a toll. Yeah, but it is what it is. So, and you gotta make the most of the energies that are coming about. 17th of October, Sun enters Libra Tula. It's another sun, that's Sankranti, the sun shifting signs. Libra, it's an enemy sign. It's debilitated Sun here. So it's not going to do that great. So you might see, even though you're getting your act together, potentially when Sun enters Chitra, there's going to be a dip at work, goals. Also, the Sun represents father and authority, so there can be issues with those things. And Sun is in Libra. 18th of October, Sun crosses K2. So you have fiery planet crossing again, K2, explosive. So Sun represents also things like work, health. There can be unexpected losses, separation of work, health, infections, accidents. So, just be mindful. I wouldn't take unmitigated risks this month because enough's going to be happening anyway. You can't outrun your karma, but it's just why push it? I guess. Well, that might be your if you're a Rahu K2 type person, you might be into that. 20th of October, the exact conjunction of Sun and Mercury. So I mentioned Mercury is going to start switching from more of an internal to an external focus. 24th of October, Sun enters Swati Nakshatra. So after this little bobble, or maybe a big bobble that happens when Sun crosses Ketu, then Sun's going to enter Swati. So again, the new grown grass blowing in the wind. So you're going to have a new but shaky situation with work, father, studies, authority, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a new life, but again, not quite solid, not quite steady, not quite established. So now, Moon, Chandra, and then Rahu, Ketu. So now this is where we're getting into eclipse type stuff. And this is kind of the big show. You never quite know what's going on with eclipses, no matter how much you analyze them, because again, it's all about Rahu, Ketu for the most part, and they're planets that symbolize hidden things, unexpected things. So it's sort of the only thing you can expect from eclipses is expect the unexpected, and that can even be a good a good expectation. But let's go through here because you'll see, and then I'll show you the just briefly the eclipse horoscopes. I'll go into them more deeply individually later in the month, but just so you have some idea of what's going on, what's coming. October 3rd, Venus has the exact aspect of Rahu. So again, unexpected turn or impulse in love, maybe with somebody foreign or online. October 5th, Mars crosses K2, explosive, as I mentioned, infections, accidents, new directions, taking a sudden left turn in life, that sort of thing. October 11th, Rahu K2 goes Sunday. So Sunday means that planets are in the first or last degree of a sign, and they start to become destabilized because they're shifting energies. And so only 11 days into the month, Rahu and Ketu are becoming destabilized, and then we're going to have the eclipses with these destabilized Rahu and Ketu. So it's going to be even more weird and wild than probably a typical eclipse. 14th of October is the solar eclipse. That's the Surya Grahan. That's going to be in Virgo and Chitra Nakshatra. It's a friend sign. Yay, that helps a bit. But this is kind of like I kind of felt like, upsetting the apple cart. So whatever you've just been working on, it might be like, it all kind of because again, Sun, Mars, or not Venus, Mercury have all been in Virgo for the last 2 weeks. So you have Sun and Mars, fiery planets, a lot of action, a lot of, with Mercury and Sun sign, a lot of thinking, a lot of action. And then here's the solar eclipse. So it's again, I kind of got this feeling of upsetting the apple cart. When you stack all the apples all nice and it's like, oh, they look so tasty and juicy. It's like, they're all like on the ground, sort of thing. Like in a movie when the horses run by. It's kind of the image that comes to mind. Um, so, it may be a lesson in not getting attached to things. Do what you can do, but let it go. The karma's going to play out the way the karma plays out. And again, if you're not running Sun, if you're not running Moon, if you're not running Rahu Ketu, then these eclipses may not be too big of a deal. The other thing is depending on where you are in the world, and I'll get into the eclipse paths. So you'll see where in the world these are going to be more, the energies of these eclipses are going to be more prominent. But still, if you happen to be more impacted by the solar eclipse, this is the energy it might feel like, or you might experience. 18th of October, Sun crosses K2. So again, explosive energies, maybe something expected with health or father, your health or father's health, or father generally. 19th of October, Mercury crosses K2, unexpected, kind of collision with friends, colleagues, aunts, uncles. Mercury symbolizes all those things. 20th of October, there's a lunar eclipse or Chandragrahan. This is going to be in Aries and Ashwini Nakshatra. So there's some new shift that's happening here. Luckily for the moon, Aries is a neutral sign, so it doesn't make things better or worse, but definitely not worse. But there's also this Mercury Mars planetary war going on. So the planets, not only are the planets destabilized, but the houses that the planets own So Mercury owns Gemini, Virgo, Mars owns Aries, Scorpio. There's going to be even more instability. And the thing is with the lunar eclipse, we have that parivartana between the sun and Venus. So with Venus in its own sign, that's going to help protect the inorganic or non-living things. And so I'll show you the charts, but what I was seeing in these eclipses is that, unfortunately, in some ways I don't know, I guess it depends on your values, but it seemed like there was protection on all the houses that were affected by the eclipses because all the planets are involved for both eclipses. So it's going to shift. Everybody's going to feel this in some way or another. Um, some more than others, again, depending on what planet they're running and how strong they are in a natal chart and that sort of thing. But um, the protection was for inanimate things. So it seems like the shakeup going on this month with the lunar and solar eclipse is actually going to be with people and relationships. So, I don't know. In my mind, at least, that can be a harder thing, ultimately to deal with. Although, some of these, maybe it's again, it's a cleansing type thing, and you're like, oh, great, that person's on. Could be, if you've had a really, bad situation with someone, you're like, oh, ta-ta, adios. But well, I'll show you the charts, and then you make up your own mind about it. So, a couple of famous people that have Rahu and Ketu in Pisces and Virgo, because they're shifting um, signs on the 30th of October. I've actually analyzed a couple charts that have this Rahu, Ketu, in Pisces and Virgo. Alan Turing, who's a massively genius computer scientist and Nazi code breaker. I analyzed his chart, and that is in my June 2023 transits video if you want to look at his chart. And also Celine Dion, international mega singer. I analyzed her chart in May 2023 transits video if you want to check that out. So let's take a look at these charts. Okie doke. So here are the two eclipse charts. And again, this is just a brief overview of them. I'm going to do each one separately, more in depth, closer to the actual eclipses, assuming that they don't sidetrack me the way Rahu and Ketu normally do. Yeah, so the first chart here on the left, this is 14th of October, 2023, 13:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Lagna Nakshatra is Purvashada. And the Lugnatia, the ruling planet of this chart is Jupiter, and it's gone to the fifth house. The thing is that Jupiter in the fifth house creates a Karka. So there are issues with Jupiterian things like children potentially, but also advisement. And the Dasha period for this moment in time is Mars, Jupiter, Ketu, Rahu. So, since Jupiter is in the fifth house, children, but also advice, I could see how this was like bad advice actually, because we have this mega Saturn aspecting onto the fifth house. You see that blue arrow. You have Rahu there. It's unstable, Sundi in the last degree or the first degree of the constellation of Aries. So it's destabilized. It also represents hidden, unexpected things. You have Mars aspecting into the house. So that will again protect non-living things, but living things are going to be more impacted. Um, and the thing here is that because Rahu's in the fifth house, Mars is in the fifth house, Jupiter. So we have three of the Dasha planets in the fifth house of advice. That's why that seemed pretty prominent. And then the thing that was that the eclipse is happening in Virgo slash kind of slash spills over into uh, Libra a little bit because the sun is so close to the Virgo Libra line. And the thing though is I circled in this big saffron circle here. Of all these planets, Well, the sun is going to be eclipsed because it's a solar eclipse. So you can't see the sun. The moon is right with the sun. You can't see the moon. Mercury's very close. Mercury's combust. You can't see Mercury. Mars is going to be combust. K2 you never see anyway. So we have 5 planets here that are just gonna like, it's like putting the reset button on the sky. The thing that was that the eclipse is happening in the 10th house at this moment and also spilling over the 11th house, so career and income. So if we just read this real quick, this is like bad advice about job and income stuff. So be careful of that. I'll get into it more in depth later in the month, but just to give you some idea of what these eclipses look like. Then if we look at the right side here, this is the lunar eclipse is happening on the 20th of October, 16:23 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So look at all these lines. So the rising sign here, instead of being Sagittarius, as it was in the solar eclipse, now we have Pisces. So the Lugnatia is still Jupiter. The ruling planet for both of these charts is Jupiter. The rising, the Lugna Nakshatra is Uttar Bhadrapada. That's symbolized by the back legs of a funeral pyre. So some, destruction there. And again, a funeral pyre, that's for a person, right? And we have Rahu here and Ashwini. That's, medical. I believe the moon's also in Ashwini, again, medical. Jupiter is in Bharani Nakshatra, life and death. Luckily Saturn is in Dhanishta. Thank God. But you can see you have 3 planets in the second house here, including the Lugnatia, the ruling planet of Jupiter. So luckily Jupiter going into the second house, that's a positive house. It's a house that represents family, speech, savings. Um, and contrast right directly opposite there, you've got K2, Mercury, Sun, Mars. Only the Sun is something you're gonna be able to see because K2 is invisible all the time. Mercury and Mars are too close to the Sun, they're both combust. And so that planetary war is something you won't be able to see either. So that fallout with like a colleague or client or whatever, it's not going to be in a public space. It's going to be like an argument with somebody you didn't expect out of the blue, but like in private or whatever, almost like a frenemy type thing, unfortunately. Yeah, and the other thing is that again, the second house represents savings. The eighth house is also sort of money related. Um, the eighth house is other people's money and things like inheritance and bankruptcy and stuff like that. Jupiter in the second house, also the second house representing speech. This could be somebody talking about or advocating or trying to get help or advice about money matters. And the thing is, with Mars aspecting into the second house, that's going to protect the second house. Saturn, even though it's a planet that represents loss, it's super strong. It's actually protecting the 12th house of loss. But again, inanimate things, not people. Then we have Venus, Venus and Sun, parivartana here. So Venus is going to protect the 8th house, non-living things. The Sun's going to protect the 6th house, non-living things. So what I was saying here was there's some issues with money, but I don't think the fallout from this money thing is actually going to be money. I think it's going to be people. And what came to mind, especially when I saw these, like it's a stellium, right? 4 planets in the 8th house. So you can call that a Pravraja Yoga area of focus or concentration. That can be inheritance. And I've just seen when people pass away, because we've been talking about, maybe health issues for somebody like father or an authority figure or something like that. I've just seen, and I know other people have seen the best and you really see what people are really all about when somebody passes away and money's involved and there's some sort of inheritance. Some people become vultures, some people become magnanimous. Like you really start to see, what do people value? Do they value money or do they value people? Do they value relationships? And so this eclipse, especially the second one, and because it's a lunar eclipse, that's the other thing is it's going to be more not just soul purpose related. I mean, not that just, I shouldn't use just, but the solar eclipse is more about purpose and uh, in life and the soul's direction, that sort of thing. The moon, though, the lunar eclipse is all about the mind and resetting the mind. Um, it looks like there's going to be perhaps a rude awakening about people in life, in you know everybody's life, who you might see a new side of them for better or worse, and that'll shift relationships. That's what I'm seeing here. Um, the dasha sequence, the dasha period for this moment in time is Ketu, Saturn, Rahu, Saturn. So Ketu, Saturn, Saturn, those are both planets about separation and loss. Rahu's about ambition, and you can see Rahu Ketu or eclipse energy, and Saturn is in the 12th house of loss, so 12th house of loss, super strong. So we're picking up the second house, the 8th house, and the 12th house here. And then let's see, Saturn is Lord of the 12th house, so that protects the non-living things, but it's also the Lord of the 11th house, which represents clubs, groups, societies. So there might be some fallout there, but also income. So, maybe if there's some shift in, the money or income or something like that, all of a sudden people start, if the money's good, more people show up. If the money's not good, people disappear. That could be. So those are just, again, general collective energies for the eclipses, and I'll get more into detail separately in other videos later in the month. All right, so the eclipse paths. So you always have to verify or kind of qualify, I guess is a better word, the eclipses. So with the solar eclipse, so this first map at the top is the eclipse pattern or eclipse path for the solar eclipse on October 14th. That kind of darker squiggle line that's marked that goes through North America and part of northern part of South America through Central America. That's the eclipse path for the solar eclipse. And the parts that are touched in North America are Mexico, USA from Oregon to Texas, Central America, including Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. Excuse me, I have hiccups now. Hopefully they'll go away. And then the top northern part of South America, Colombia, and Brazil. So the eclipse path, there'll be more energy and more influence of the eclipse in these areas of the world. Okay, now the lunar eclipse at the end of the month on the 28th, you can see that's a whole different pattern, and that's because of the relative size of the Earth and the sun and the moon. And I get into that in my video on eclipses. So if you want to know more about the technical aspects of eclipses and what they mean generally, then you can get that information there. So pretty much everywhere in the world is going to be touched by this lunar eclipse at the end of the month. Exceptions being North America, Central and Western part. Central America is off the hook, and South America, the eastern part of the continent, and then most of Antarctica is off the hook here. But most of the world will be influenced by this lunar eclipse. And the thing about eclipses too is that the general advice is 3 days before and after the eclipse, you generally don't want to schedule any major life event that you want to go well, like a marriage or moving into a house or something like that, or traveling to a new country, because the energy is just so chaotic. And you can see this month it's going to be even more chaotic because the Rahu and Ketu are Sunday. So just be aware of that. It's usually, and I wrote all the kind of what to do general advice for eclipses in my eclipse video that you can check out. Um, it's usually more of a time to go inward and do spiritual practice and things like that. So I do have another celebrity chart. I did want to offer a trigger warning here. I'm going to get into this person's chart, Diana Nyad. She was a journalist and public speaker, or she's still living, journalist, speaker, and long distance swimmer. But part of her history and part of this chart that I thought was important to cover involves sexual abuse as a young person. So if you don't want to hear about that, just move past the slide. But if you're okay, I'll get into it a little bit. So this is her chart. She's a long distance swimmer. She, at the age of 64, it wasn't verified by any major swimming authority, but she is known for swimming from Cuba to Florida, which was like almost a 5-day thing, which I'm just like, wow, somebody thought to do that. That's interesting. But let's get into her chart. And the reason why I brought her chart up is because she has Rahu in Pisces and she's Ketu in Virgo. So this is where Rahu and Ketu are ending up once they switch signs at the end of October. So that's why I brought her chart up. And she's an interesting person in her life. We'll get into that. So she was born, her birth date is she was born August 22nd, 1949 in New York City. There is not an exact birth time for her. So what did I do to get a lugna for her? I actually drew up a samaya chart and that landed her in Jupiter and excuse me, that landed her in Capricorn with Jupiter retrograde in the lugna. And when I went through this chart, it looked like it worked pretty well. So I went with it. It may not be correct, but it looked like it worked pretty well. So, her birth dasha, she was born at a time when Mercury, Ketu, Saturn, Rahu. So Mercury, the rational mind, Ketu separation, Saturn separation, Rahu unusual. And you can see in her eighth house here, she's got Saturn, she's got Mercury. So two of these planets, and then she's got Rahu, Ketu, so unusualness, and then she ran Mercury, so she started in the eighth house here. Mercury is also the lord of the ninth house, so that's important. So the eighth house and ninth house are really important for this woman, and I think who she ended up being in life. So Mercury, K2's in the ninth house. Then she went Venus, which is in the in the ninth house, and then Sun, which is a planet that represents this father and authority. In the house that represents father and authority is the ninth house. So I was really seeing a lot of ninth house issues for her. And I think that was actually because of what happened in her childhood. That's part of what drove her to do things like even think of swimming from Cuba to, Florida and all that training and all that. I mean, that's just like wild. You have to have a very different mindset to do something, to even think about doing something like that. Um, Anyway, if we look at her lugna, her rising sign, she's got Capricorn or Makara. Again, I'm not sure this is correct, but it seemed to work pretty well when I first looked at it. But, I'm sure it's debatable. So Capricorn is a movable earth sign, so very practical, but very active. She's got a debilitated Jupiter retrograde in Uttarashada. That's a victorious type of nakshatra, symbolized by a elephant tusk. So there's this piercing nature. And we'll see through her chart, there's a lot of planets that indicate it's kind of funny, like Jupiter is a benefic planet, but it's in a piercing nakshatra. So there's this weaving together of good and bad and like pleasure pain is what I was getting for her. Um then she also has a moon, which is a dark moon. It's almost new moon here, and it's swa. It's in its own nakshatra, so it's exaggerated condition. It's strong, and the moon is probably in Aslesha. It's definitely in Cancer, so it's a strong moon. Besides being dark makes it a weak. So again, it's an exaggerated moon. So it's probably in Aslesha because that the moon is in Aslesha most of this day, but it could also be in Pushya. So again, Pushya and Aslesha are diopposing energies. Pushya is like the sweet cow, like chewing its, the grass and stuff like that. gentle, stable energy. And Aslesha is a snake that can like bite you, sting you, run away and hide. So again, there's this like dual energy here. And then Mars is in Punarvasu, and that's aspecting the Lugna. Punarvasu is like a quiver of arrows. So again, a sharp pointed thing, edgy, and going out and coming back, going out and coming back, like I'm sure she did with all of her swimming. I mean, that's what you do. You swim from, I used to swim, in high school, like one end to the other. I mean, I spent hours and hours doing that, just going back and forth, back and forth. And then she's going back and forth like around Manhattan and then from Cuba to Florida. So you have to have it, to even, do that even for an hour or two, let alone 5 days. I mean, you have to be able to not get bored. I mean, first of all, besides actually try to accomplish something higher than that, not just besides just doing it. So what you can see here with Mars aspecting into the Lugna, Mars is going to be exalted in the Lugna. It's going to make it strong. That's where her athleticism comes in. Then she has this Jupiter there. Jupiter's debilitated, but it's still Jupiter. It's retrograde, so there's some strength. It's also Digbala, so secondary strength, even though it's debilitated. So that saves Jupiter quite a bit. So that's where her publishing, speaking stuff comes in. Super optimistic. I mean, you'd have to be optimistic to even think, yeah, I think I could swim from Cuba to Florida. It's just pretty wild. Also, enthusiasm. Mars with Jupiter together, that's usually a very enthusiastic because Mars is like fiery and Jupiter is like expansive. So it's usually an enthusiastic person. Jupiter and Moon, diametrically opposed to each other. That actually creates a traveler's combination as well as a networking combination. Successful because of that Uttarashada Jupiter there, as well as the Lugna. So it's a successful person. But with this debilitated Jupiter, and Jupiter can also represent children, that's where I was picking up too, like something debilitated child, but successful, like kind of took the negatives in the childhood and made them positives, and that's essentially what I think she did. What I was seeing in her chart. So it's kind of this like child psychology. And not that she was a child psychologist, but psychology was definitely what she needed to accomplish what she did. Because especially when you do these super endurance athletic things, all the experts will tell you it's not necessarily that, you have the right body. I mean, some bodies are better than others, but when you do these extreme sports, it's really more of a mind game. And she has been extensively studied for her ability to dissociate, which is psychologically the term we use when people can just like check out and kind of like unhook their brain from all their pain sensors in their body. And when you see the pictures of her from after she accomplished these long swims or what, I mean, she's sunburned. She had like 5, 10 jellyfish burns on her body, so many jellyfish burns. Like she started going into respiratory distress. Just staying awake for 5 days, I can't do that, let alone swim for 5 days. So I was just like, wow. I mean, just her mind. That was like, then I started thinking when I started seeing all these like sharp, edgy, nakshatras and things like that, and debilitated Jupiter. And I was just like, what's her story? So the Lugnatia, since she's a Capricorn, based on this, she's a Capricorn Lugna. Her Lugnatia is Saturn. Saturn's in Purva Falguni. So that's another contrast because Saturn is a planet that represents decay, delays, chronic illness, destruction. And it's in Purva Falguni. Purva Falguni is like a enjoyment nakshatra. Like the finer things in life, swinging the hammock and, all this. And I was just like, so I almost got, my mind was almost like, so she enjoys pain? I mean, she might have to do what she did, all this long distance swimming to this extent. So, and this is in the eighth house. So deep in her psychology, is this maybe enjoying pain a bit, maybe being a bit sadistic, frankly. Again, I don't want to get this, some of this energy was getting pretty dark, and I was just like, okay, I think I don't want to go too deep into this chart because even what I found on the surface was starting to get disturbing for me. Anyway, so again, the Saturn is in the eighth house, deep psychology. The sun is Swa there, so the sun is strong. So And the sun is like in Maga. So we have sun, which represents authority and father in its own sign. So that's strong. The sun is strong, and it's in the nakshatra represented by a throne. So deep in her psychology is father being first, being best. And then there's also Mercury here in Uttara Falguni. Uttara Falguni is also sort of like Purva Falguni about enjoyment, but with a purpose. The thing too is in this eighth house, we have Sun, which represents the central nervous system. Saturn represents the neuromuscular system or junction, and then Mercury, which represents the peripheral nerves. This is all about pain in the eighth house. I mean, I was just like, wow. I mean, this is kind of blew me away. So the deep psychology of this person, Diana Nyad, is really about winning, being the best, push through the pain. Pain may even be pleasure. The other thing is that with Saturn, uh, just in the next constellation after Moon, she was born into Sadhisati. So again, Sadhisati is a 7.5 year period where the Saturn crosses through the constellation before, during, and after the Moon. It's usually, a lot of pain and loss. And for her, she was born in, what was it, 1949. Her parents divorced in 1952, so she was 3. And then her mother remarried some foreign guy. And I don't know I don't know what happened with her biological dad or what the deal was, but based on what I'm seeing in her chart, that was part of the issue is that, lost contact. And there may have been, well, let me get to that. Okay. But anyway, there was definitely difficulty in the childhood because she's born in Sati Sati. And there was an influence of Saturn on the mind. So somehow in her childhood, I think she picked up this I'm better, I'm a winner if I can suck it up and work through the pain. This is what I got from this. Okay, so then her ninth house. So this is like the one that was like even more, just as much, if not more, than the eighth house. So the ninth house, she has Ketu and Chitra. So we talked about that. So that's a structure, but unusual structure. Venus and Uttara Falguni, so love relationships, loved ones, in enjoyment with a purpose, aspected by Mars and Punarvasu. And she ran Ketu and Venus, so the 2 planets in the ninth house from age 14 to 41. So, okay, so with Venus and Mars in the same house, even by aspect, we're talking about potential love, romance, relationships. With K2 there, unusual structure and explosive. Okay. So, when I saw this before I read her bio, I was just like, oh, is there some sort of sexual abuse with father? Maybe. I didn't read it. Or stepfather, because she had two fathers, and the constellation for the ninth house is Virgo. Virgo's a dual sign, and there are 2 planets here, and 2 other planets aspecting the ninth house. Um, so that's a lot of planetary energy on the ninth house. Jupiter represents children, Mars can represent injuries and violence, K2 unusual, Venus love, so something in her childhood. So I don't know if it was father or stepfather who was, maybe sexually abusing her, molesting her, something like that. But she claims that her swim coach, that she connected with once her family, she moved to Florida with her new stepdad mother when she was about 7 or in 7th grade or something. She started swimming seriously in 7th grade, and that's when she was in Florida. She claims that her swim coach molested her from the age of 14 to 18. And the ninth house can represent not only father, but authority figure and guru or teacher. So, yeah. And the thing is that what I found as a clinician is that when people, especially women, are sexually abused, if they did not have the mental capacity to compartmentalize, after sexual abuse, they develop, as a protective survival mechanism, their brain creates some ability to compartmentalize in their mind. that pain or, crossing of boundaries and inappropriate behavior and predatory nature and all that sort of thing to protect the mind and the organism, the being, the person. The mind creates the ability to compartmentalize. And I've seen with people who are sexually abused when they're young that, again, not always, but often, they can get into relationships where they enjoy um, kind of unusual sexual practices or painful sexual practices because somehow it's wrapped up deep in their deep psychology from childhood, or they can just be very cold. I mean, somebody who sleep with almost anybody, not care. It's purely physical because again, their brain shut down all the emotional stuff. Um, so that they survive and they don't like break down. I mean, some people, have a mental breakdown after that and never recover. So anyway, so it looks like she took all of this and in a weird way, the swim coach, besides, telling her how fast or often to swim laps in the pool, through the molestation of her, that's probably where she got the mental preparation to do this like swim from Cuba to Florida. Again, it was just wild that she even thought to do this because of her ability to dissociate, and the ability to dissociate may have come from molestation of the coach. And again, I don't know if biological father, stepfather also as well, or other people, but at least the swim coach has been tagged with that. 60-hour swims, 5-day swims, multiple jellyfish, all over. I mean, even one jellyfish, I mean, most people like her just laid up in the house for at least a week, that's pretty painful. Sunburns, exhaustion. And again, she did this when she was 64. It's just like and her fifth attempt. So it's not like her first attempt, she made it. She did this 5 times. And swimming out in the middle of the ocean without a shark tank or, I mean, shark cage or, I mean, it blows the mind that she even thought to do this. So anyway, that's how that all plays out. Again, sorry, this is a bit of a dark energy, not to mean that, having Rahu or Ketu in Pisces and Virgo will land you in this woman's history, but it's just, I don't know, this is the chart that popped up. So, there's going to be something unusual about this, about her story, especially because she ran Ketu and she was born, her planetary sub period was K2. So there's going to be a lot of K2 type energy, wrapped up in this one. To lighten things up a little bit, so her second house, if we can, the second house, we have Sun, Saturn, Mercury aspecting here. Saturn will be in its own sign, so that'll make the second house strong. This is where she gets her motivational speaker, writer stuff from, because she was a journalist. I mean, she was in all kinds of news media, radio media. She wrote, I think, 4 books. So that's the Jupiter, but also her second house. And then the third house is Rahu and Revati, aspected by Venus, which will be exalted in the third house, and Uttara Falguni and Ketu. So she's going to have kind of a compulsive need to express herself. Um, and again, not necessarily deep, deep psychology of everything she experienced, but it may actually be therapeutic for her to have a voice rather than be silenced like she was as a child. So anyway, hopefully that wasn't too dark or depressing. I was feeling it, but I was like somehow it felt like I was still supposed to talk about this. All right. So anyway, for you at home, if you have a copy of your own chart, you can look at it and find out which houses these eclipses are going to be happening. You want to find Aries or Mesha for the lunar eclipse on the 28th. Also Virgo or Kanya and Libra Tula because the solar eclipse on the 14th sort of covers both or spans both. And then I have here, if you don't have a copy of your birth chart, then you can go get a copy for free on the internet. They're easy to find. And you might also want to find out what dasha planetary period you're currently running. because the planets you're currently running will give you more of an indication, because all these planets are piled on top of each other. If somebody's running Mars, they're going to have more of a Mars influence. If somebody's running Venus right now, they're going to have more of a Venus influence. So, and then, again, with Rahu Ketu, it's all kind of a twisted, hidden, unexpected, nobody knows exactly. You can't exactly predict for anybody what's going to happen because it's going to be weird and wild. But so again, I have the houses listed here in this and the next slide. So the first seventh bhava axis, the first house represents, very generally, it represents a lot more things, but just very generally, self, personality, health, reputation. The seventh house represents spouse, partner, independent business, that sort of thing. So you can look at houses that line up with where your Aries, Virgo, Libra, or Mesha, Kanya, Tula are, and figure out which areas of your life the eclipse energy is going to be playing out. The second slide here, I have the other houses, 4 and 10 axis, 5 and 11 axis, 6 and 12 axis. So again, you can be a little bit your own astrologer, but never freak yourself out. If something doesn't look good, it may not be true, because there are a lot of, as you can see from what I do, it's pretty complex. So again, if you're looking for small indications, you could do that, but just don't scare yourself. Okay. Yeah, so that's it for October. All the transits, a couple of celebrity charts and eclipses, at least a preview. I'll get into more depth as I mentioned. So thank you again for your time, all of your support. I appreciate everybody listening, sending in donations, subscribing, comments. It's all very much appreciated. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology or Jyotish are in my concepts playlist. If you're interested in individual birth chart reading, I do them on Zoom. You can email heartlightastra@yahoo.com. I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine that includes other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, as well as homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so that might be of interest as well. So, as always, I hope you found this interesting and helpful as you navigate the energy cycles of your life. And until the next one, namaste.